Before entering the story, please subscribe to the channel, like and share to help me. Thank you. Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the medieval city of Krakow, sometime around the 1400s. Picture this: narrow cobblestone streets, the muffled shuffle of leather shoes, and 100 little windows flickering with candlelight. You drift along those streets right now, feeling the cool night air against your face, heading toward one particular window, glowing soft and gold. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Drop that in the comments. Inside, a tailor hunches over a long wooden table, tracing lines on a piece of precious fabric. The room smells like beeswax, lanolin from wool, and a hint of sweat because, let's face it, medieval underarm hygiene wasn't exactly their specialty. On the table lies a bolt of crimson cloth, so vibrant it almost hums in the candlelight. This isn't just cloth, it's months of work by sheep herders, spinners, dyers, weavers, and merchants who risked their lives transporting it over bandit-filled roads. Cutting it wrong isn't like messing up a paper snowflake. It's like setting a pile of gold on fire. That color. Krakow, Poznań, and Elway thrived on the cloth trade. The L, Poland's favorite unit for measuring fabric, could mean slightly different lengths in different towns. Historians still debate exactly how long a Krakow L was in the 1400s. His knees hurt from kneeling on wooden floors all day. You're starting to get sleepy too, but keep watching. His shears, heavy and iron, glint in the candlelight. Medieval shears weren't like modern scissors. They didn't have comfy plastic handles or smooth action. These things weighed nearly a kilogram and required serious wrist strength. Some apprentices reportedly tied small rocks to their scissors when practicing, just to build stamina. That's right, medieval gym day involved cutting imaginary sleeves while lifting rock weights. No one's making an exercise app for that, but maybe they should. Some think it was around 75 centimeters. Others argue it changed depending on the merchant's mood, the phase of the moon, or whether the local bishop had sneezed that morning. Merchants paid special taxes to bring in wool from Hungary, England, or Silesia. You can almost feel the vibration in your fingertips. Cloth yields under the blade, curling slightly at the edge like a ribbon. It's beautiful, but dangerous. Some say guilds kept written prayer books just for craftsmen, while others think the prayers were whispered traditions, passed from master to apprentice like secret recipes. Either way, the sleeve remained the greatest threat in the tailor's world. One extra millimeter the wrong way, and you lines end up trying to explain to a furious merchant why his imported Hungarian wool is now a pile of awkward scraps. He stretches his arms, his task halfway done, and leaves the rest for dawn. Better to sleep on a sleeve cutting decision than to rush. After all, you can't uncut fabric. Tailors often worked directly with these elite merchants, which meant that one bad cut wasn't just embarrassing, it could offend powerful guild masters or even royal clients. Imagine cutting into a bolt of imported English broadcloth, only to realize you measured in the wrong units. Congratulations, you've just triggered an economic incident. Fire regulations were strict. Too many houses had gone up in flames because a sleepy apprentice nodded off while trimming cuffs. That's why many tailors prayed not just for precision, but for wakefulness. Falling asleep on the job could burn down your shop, your neighborhood, and if you were really unlucky, your own eyebrows. It's not cheap. In fact, a bolt of fine cloth like this could cost more than a peasant's entire farm. His hands are steady, but his lips move silently. He reaches for a chalk stub, the medieval version of a tailor's pencil. There's no graphite yet, just soft stone that leaves pale marks on the expensive fabric. He begins sketching the curve of a sleeve, careful to conserve every inch. Sleeves, believe it or not, were the trickiest part of any garment. A single tunic might use up to half its fabric just on sleeves. And cutting them wrong could leave you with useless scraps no one wanted. He's reciting a prayer that tailors whispered before every major cut. It wasn't mandatory, but let's be honest, you'd probably do the same if a single slip of your shears meant financial ruin. Some tailors even said that the devil liked to sit invisibly on your shoulder while you cut, nudging your elbow at the worst possible moment. Historians still argue whether that part was superstition or just a clever way to blame mistakes on demons instead of your own shaky hands. He's praying not because he's about to do brain surgery, but because he's about to cut a sleeve. And in medieval Poland, cutting a sleeve could destroy your life. You probably won't survive this world if you're bad at geometry. So, before you get comfortable, Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet creak on the tailor's floorboards. That's why your tailor friend isn't just muttering random words. You watch as the tailor's shears hover over the fabric, his breath slows. In medieval Poland, the textile industry wasn't just about making clothes, it was about power. Oh, and by the way, measurements back then weren't standardized. Your tailor friend wipes his brow with a cloth that probably smells like last week's soup. Tailors in medieval Poland whispered that God makes the wool, but the devil measures the sleeve. And here's a fun little fact to keep your brain gently buzzing. In some towns, tailors worked so late into the night that city guards had to check if they were using candles legally. The tailor shifts in his chair, his joints pop. Your tailor whispers again, lips barely moving. Bless this cut, lest I bring ruin upon my house. The shears press down, slicing through the fabric with a soft sound that makes your eyelids heavy. Historians still debate whether medieval tailors had official cutting prayers written down, or if these rituals were mostly personal. As you settle deeper into your blankets, you imagine the tailor blowing out his candle, careful not to drip wax on the cloth. The candle's out now, but let's not leave just yet. You're still in the tailor shop, resting quietly in the shadows as the room cools. The tailor has curled up in the corner, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of sheep and damp stone. This bolt of crimson wool, it might have cost as much as a small house in the countryside. Historians still argue about the exact numbers, but one 15th century Polish inventory lists certain dyed wools at prices so steep, only the nobility or the merchant elite could afford them. One bad snip, and poof, you've just destroyed a textile that took 6 months to produce and transport. And let's not even start on the taxes. Medieval Poland loved a good import fee. Old straw, sand, even bits of lead. Tailors had to know how to spot a fake bolt. Some would prod the cloth with needles, sniff it, or slice a tiny test strip just to make sure it wasn't secretly packed with medieval filler material. Historians still debate whether this was an occasional scam or a full-blown industry problem, but let's just say it wasn't unheard of. He's still asleep, but you can almost hear his dreams. Endless yards of wool, sleeves curling in weird directions, gilt fines raining from the ceiling. If you had a bolt of fine wool tucked away in a chest, it wouldn't spoil like food or rust like iron. They'd come into the tailor's shop demanding crimson for Easter, blue for Marian feasts, and black for funerals. Some workshops probably had parchment records, but others might have used colored threads or cloth swatches pinned to walls as reminders. It glows faintly in your mind's eye, like coals under ash. Tomorrow, the tailor will wake up, stretch his stiff shoulders, and cut the second sleeve. But tonight, it lies untouched, a silent, priceless treasure waiting for the morning light. Either way, the mental load was huge. That's part of why tailors prayed not just for skillful hands, but for clear minds. Cutting cloth wasn't just physical, it was intellectual. You needed geometry, accounting, and a good sense of who would get mad if you ran out of blue dye before All Saints' Day. Tailors had to remember all these requests, manage their fabric carefully, and somehow not mess up the measurements all without spreadsheets, sticky notes, or a helpful phone reminder that says don't forget Lord Stanisław's funeral tunic. It might even get more valuable if market prices rose. That's why medieval wills often listed fabric among the most prized possessions, right alongside jewelry, land deeds, and livestock. Tailors knew this intimately because they were the final link in the cloth chain, the ones who turned raw fabric into clothing, uniforms, or ceremonial robes. No wonder tailors sometimes woke up in cold sweats. They weren't just craftsmen, they were fabric economists. Some scholars joke that Krakow's city council probably dreamed about cloth taxes in their sleep. And that's not even counting imported silks or velvets, which cost more than their weight in gold. First, someone had to raise sheep, shear them, wash the wool, card into fluff, spin it into thread, weave it on a loom fillet that's like medieval pre-shrinking, dye it with complicated plant or insect-based colors, and finally finish it by brushing the surface with teasel heads to make it soft. No factories, no machines, just human hands over and over again. Instead of Shift plus Delete, you press Guild Exile. Congratulations, you're now forbidden from touching Excel ever again. Hope you enjoy your new career in goat herding. You can hear his soft breathing, slow, and even like yours is starting to become. But your mind drifts on, thinking about that bolt of cloth still lying on the table. One bad cut doesn't just ruin a garment. It could cost him his reputation, his shop, and his membership in the local guild. Tailor guilds controlled everything back then: who could open a shop, how much they could charge, and which designs were allowed. If a tailor messed up too often, guild masters might fine him, publicly shame him, or in extreme cases, banish him from the profession entirely. See, in medieval Poland, cloth wasn't just a material, it was currency, literally. Some merchants used bolts of cloth to pay debts, like you might use cash or digital transfers today. In fact, cloth was often more valuable than coins, since fabric prices kept rising, while silver currency could be debased by greedy kings. Tailors knew this better than anyone. They worked with cloth every day, yet they could rarely afford to buy it outright. You're beginning to realize why cutting fabric made tailors so nervous. It wasn't just about making a sleeve, it was like slicing into someone's savings account with a very sharp knife. You run your fingers along the fabric in the dark, careful not to crease it. It gets worse when you remember that Poland wasn't just buying cloth, they were producing it, too. Polish weavers made tons of homespun fabrics from local wool, but for the really luxurious stuff. That came from Flanders, England, or Italy. Each region had its specialty. Flemish cloth was famously smooth. English broadcloth had a tight weave perfect for winter tunics, and Italian silks were basically wearable status symbols. Polish merchants traveled along the Amber Road and through Hanseatic League ports to get their hands on the good stuff, dodging pirates, highwaymen, and the occasional corrupt tollkeeper. By the time that fabric arrived at a Krakow tailor's bench, it had crossed rivers, mountains, and international politics. You might be wondering, why was fabric so expensive in the first place? Well, consider how it was made. Here's a fun tidbit to keep you awake just a little longer. Medieval wool merchants sometimes stuffed their cloth bolts with extra junk to increase the weight and price. So, when your tailor friend prays before cutting, he's not being dramatic, he's protecting himself from a domino effect of disasters. Imagine that happening today. You're sitting at your laptop, editing a spreadsheet, and you make a typo. You shift slightly, listening to the soft creak of the tailor's bench. Another reason cloth was so precious, it held its value better than most goods. Speaking of robes, did you know some of the wealthiest Polish nobles ordered entire outfits just for specific religious festivals? Historians still debate whether tailors kept written order books at this time or just relied on memory. As you drift deeper into sleep, you imagine the bolt of crimson cloth still resting silently on the table. The candlelight is gone, but your thoughts linger. You stay with the tailor through the night, listening to his breathing slow as sleep takes over. But you're still thinking about sleeves. Sleeves were the nightmare geometry problem of medieval tailoring. Back then, tailors had to think three-dimensionally, imagining how a flat piece of cloth would wrap around a moving human arm. There were no dress forms, no mannequins. Medieval cloth wasn't produced in wide industrial rolls like you find today at craft stores. Done wrong, it turned a nobleman's tunic into something resembling a medieval crop top when the fabric sagged halfway through a banquet. Most looms back then were narrow, about 60 to 90 centimeters wide, which meant tailors had to get creative. Some garments required piecing together multiple panels just to cover the body, and for sleeves, that meant careful cutting, sometimes diagonal to the grain to make sure the fabric would stretch just enough for elbow movement, but not so much that it warped out of shape. Just apprentices who sometimes had to stand still for hours while the master measured angles and muttered to himself. Back then, chalk wasn't mass-produced in nice little rectangles. It was often just natural gypsum, ground down into smooth pieces that left faint lines on the cloth. Tailors guarded their chalk jealously, hiding it from apprentices who might waste it or worse drop it into a stew pot by accident. Yes, that happened. One medieval text describes a cook accidentally flavoring soup with tailor's chalk. The diners were not thrilled. Closing parenthesis, not the straightforward kind like rectangles for tunic bodies or squares for hoods. No, sleeves were evil little fabric puzzles. Cloth wasn't always perfect. Weavers sometimes left small knots or thin spots, and tailors had to spot these in dim candlelight. The curves are perfect now, smooth and balanced, waiting for the morning when iron shears will slice through them once again. But the sleeves, they still their quiet reminders of a world where cutting fabric meant cutting into the fabric of life itself. Cutting a sleeve that accidentally ran through a weak section of fabric. Disaster. The garment would tear later, and guess who got blamed? Not the weaver, not the merchant, the tailor. Always the tailor. Along the weft, or do I risk the bias? It wasn't fair, but it kept them sharp, literally. One wrong decision, and he could waste an entire bolt of cloth on a sleeve that twisted unnaturally when the wearer moved. Remember, this was an era without reliable diets. One week you're fasting for Lent, the next week you're stuffing your face at a feast day. Tailors had to build in a little fabric wiggle room, just like you might with stretchy sweatpants today. Unfortunately, there was no elastic back then, only clever cutting and careful seam placement. Iron blades sharpened so often they got smaller over time, like medieval iPhones gradually shrinking with each upgrade. A master tailor might wrap the handles in leather, or even bless the shears before using them on sacred garments like church vestments. Others may have offered quiet suggestions about laying off the roasted boar. Either way, the sleeve remained the scapegoat for all garment-related complaints. Historians still debate whether tailors had specific cutting ceremonies for holy fabric or whether that as just romanticized folklore, but the prayers were definitely real. Imagine a knight raising his sword in battle only to find his sleeve glued to his side like a fabric prison. Not a great look for chivalry, but was probably just a clever excuse to avoid talking to annoying customers. Either way, the ritual of the first cut mattered. The problem with medieval sleeves was that they consumed a ridiculous amount of fabric. Sometimes up to 50% of the total cloth went into just to pieces those long, curving shapes that wrapped around elbows and wrists. That's why tailors often started their cutting process by laying out the sleeves first. It was like the high-stakes round of medieval sewing poker. Rumors whispered through Krakow's back alleys about tailors sneaking into churches during Vespers just to eyeball the drape of a nobleman's cloak sleeve. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just guild gossip passed around for laughs. Either way, you can't help but smile at the thought of a nervous apprentice peeking from behind a pillar, taking mental notes on fabric folds while pretending to pray. If you could cut the sleeves correctly, everything else, bodice, skirt, cloak, was smooth sailing. They needed to fit snugly at the wrist, but curve gracefully at the shoulder. Too tight, and the customer couldn't raise his arms. Too loose, and the Lord might accuse you of trying to make him look like a scarecrow. And if the fabric had a pattern like stripes or checks, you had to line those up perfectly along the seam. No pressure, you lean against the tailor's workbench, watching imaginary chalk lines float in the dark. Well, smoother sailing. No one said sewing was easy. You press your fingertips to the invisible sleeve pattern in the air, tracing the swoop of fabric from shoulder to cuff. Here's a fringe fact to keep you amused. Some tailors supposedly used live models to test sleeve patterns, but not always with their customers' permission. There's also the problem of fabric width. Tailors called this bias cutting, and it was both a blessing and a curse. Done right, it made sleeves more flexible. As you drift deeper into this sleepy world, you can almost hear the tailor's internal monologue. Do I cut along the warp? You're starting to understand why tailors stayed awake at night thinking about this stuff. By the way, the tailor's shears weren't just ordinary tools, they were heirlooms. Some shops passed them down through generations. Some tailors even fasted before cutting particularly important garments. Others refused to speak for an hour beforehand to clear the mind, which might sound mystical. And then there's the chalk. You imagine picking up that soft, rounded stub of tailor's chalk. Your mind follows the tailor's hands as he marks the sleeve pattern, careful to avoid cutting into any flaws in the fabric. Tailors developed a saying for this: the needle owns the fault, not the loom. Another quirk of the job. Medieval tailors sometimes cut sleeves slightly larger than needed, just in case the client gained weight between the fitting and the final delivery. You smile to yourself as you picture a nobleman struggling to squeeze into his feast day tunic, muttering curses at the tailor while conveniently forgetting the 10 extra honey cakes he ate last month. Historians still argue about how tailors managed customer expectations in these cases. Some think tailors blamed the fabric for shrinking. As the imaginary tailor rolls over in his sleep, you watch the sleeve pattern hovering in the air, soft and glowing in your mind's eye. Your breath slows, your body sinks a little deeper into the mattress. You're still here in the tailor shop, resting quietly as dawn tiptoes toward the horizon. The tailor, still curled in his corner, shifts beneath his wool blanket, murmuring something that sounds suspiciously like math. probably sleeve measurements haunting his dreams, and you. You're floating deeper into this world of fabric, scissors, and silent prayers. Let's talk about another reason tailors prayed before cutting. The patterns were never standardized. Today, you might grab a PDF sewing pattern online, print it out, and follow the instructions step by step. But back in medieval Poland, no such thing existed. Imagine the awkwardness of explaining to a Polish nobleman why his hose, that's medieval speak for very tight pants, came up 2 inches short in front. Tailors learned quickly. Measure twice, cut once, and maybe add a little extra just in case. After all, no one wanted to be remembered as the guy who invented the accidental codpiece. Each tailor kept his own patterns, if he even bothered to make physical templates at all. Picture a young apprentice standing perfectly still, arms outstretched, holding one corner of a wool cloak while the master sliced along a chalk line. Move even a millimeter at the wrong moment, and you might ruin the symmetry. There's actually a 15th century Polish proverb about this: better a still apprentice than a clever one. Harsh. Maybe, but when you're cutting fabric worth half your annual income, you don't want improvisation. Think of it like a medieval ASL for clothing. His hands hover over the shears again. Time to make the next cut. Tailors needed steady hands, sharp eyes, and the patience of a saint. That's why they whispered prayers before each cut. Not because they were overly superstitious, but because they lived in a world where one slip of the shears could change everything. He crosses himself once more, not out of superstition, but out of habit. This is how it's always been done. The tailor moves carefully, reverently, as if slicing through something more delicate than fabric, something like trust, or reputation, or the invisible thread connecting him to the next day's work. Tailors pray because fabric doesn't forgive. A tug on the left sleeve might mean add half a finger's width, while tapping the shoulder could mean the seam is too tight. The reasons: you can almost hear the clatter of wagon wheels and the soft murmurs of market sellers setting up their stalls. The tailor sighs, knowing that soon, clients will start arriving. Some will bring new cloth. Others will complain about sleeves, hems, and necklines that don't sit quite right. He's ready for them, but first, he has to finish this crimson garment. One wrong snip, and the entire commission could fall apart. Well, sometimes the clients were present during the measuring process, and tailors didn't always want to say out loud that Lady Jadwiga's hips had mysteriously expanded since Easter. Discretion was part of the craft. There's a sleeve, a hood, a strange lumpy shape that probably turns into a doublet if you squint. Others think it was just a natural result of long hours spent working together in cramped shops where speaking constantly wasn't practical. He rubs his temples, mentally rehearsing the next cuts. Will he get it right this time? Medieval tailors used needle pins made of bone, wood, or bronze. They dulled quickly and could snap under pressure, so tailors often stuck fabric together with basting stitches, long, temporary seams that held the garment in place during try-ons. One false stitch, though, and you could leave permanent holes in fabric that cost more than a cow. Did he remember to account for the client's lopsided shoulders? Tailors back then didn't have adjustable mannequins or fitting dummies. They had to memorize each client's peculiarities. Lord Jacob's left arm longer than his right. Mistress Elzbieta's habit of slouching during fittings. All this had to be stitched into the pattern literally. Either way, it adds a strange intimacy to the tailor's world, hands flicking signals, eyes communicating quietly over bolts of cloth. But the measurements, those were almost always customized. Tailors carried wax string measuring cords in their belts, knotting them at points like shoulder to wrist or waist to ankle. Sometimes they marked measurements directly onto the cord with a bit of soot or chalk. That way, they could remember Lord Pieter's inseam without writing down anything scandalous. Some tailors cut directly from memory, relying on years of practice and a few chalk lines on the cloth. Others used stiff parchment cutouts or pieces of wood shaped like sleeves, bodices, or collars. But there was no universal sizing system, no small, medium, or large. Just this fits Lord Janus, and this mostly fits Lady Zofia if she doesn't breathe too hard. Historians still debate whether tailors shared patterns openly or kept them secret like proprietary recipes. Some guilds might have required apprentices to memorize designs as part of their training, while master tailors guarded special tricks for shaping seams or adjusting shoulders. One Krakow manuscript from the late 1400s mentions a cloak of many gussets that supposedly fit all body shapes, but no one knows exactly how it was cut. Scholars are still trying to reconstruct the pattern from scattered notes, like medieval CSI for fashion. You shift in the dim shop, imagining the tailor unfolding a wrinkled parchment covered in faint outlines. And yes, inseams mattered, even back then. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tailors in medieval Europe, including Poland, developed secret gesture languages to communicate with their apprentices silently during fittings. Historians still argue about how widespread these silent codes were. Some believe they were regional quirks, passed down within specific guilds. As dawn begins to break, you picture the tailor waking up and stretching his arms, careful not to jostle the crimson fabric still waiting on the table. And if you think that sounds stressful, imagine doing it without modern pins. Did you know that some tailors hired assistants solely to hold fabric in place while they cut? You listen to the tailor's footsteps as he pads softly around the shop, brushing sawdust from the workbench and lighting a new candle. Outside, Krakow stirs to life. Tailoring wasn't just craft. It was a high-stakes mental game, part geometry, part psychology, part performance art. As you drift, half asleep, you can still hear the faint scrape of iron on wool. The candle flickers, casting long, soft shadows across the tailor's shop. You stay close, lulled by the rhythm of scissors sliding against cloth, the faint creak of the workbench, the tailor humming under his breath. You'd think, at this point, he'd be over the nerves. But no. Every cut still feels like a small gamble. You can't blame him. Others think tailors in Krakow had informal agreements backed by the local guild or church, essentially turning unpaid debts into social black marks. Poland imported fine fabrics from Flanders and Italy, sometimes smuggled through complicated trade routes guarded by mercenary bands. One set for wool, another for linen, a special pair for silks. The shop smells faintly of metal, wool, and beeswax. His apprentice yawns in the corner, rubbing sleep from his eyes, ready to start the day's chores. Sweeping sawdust from the floor, preparing more chalk. Untangling threads from yesterday's work. He uses minimal seam allowances, just a tiny edge of fabric left for stitching. This is where gores and gussets come into play, those little triangular or diamond-shaped fabric inserts that help garments flex and fit better. Medieval clothes weren't just about draping fabric over the body. Did the sleeves pull? Did the underarm gussets hold? All part of the tailor's daily drama. They had to move with you through writing, praying, eating, and sometimes even running away from angry creditors. Church bells chime. Horses clop down cobblestone streets. But inside, the tailor remains focused, aligning the cut pieces like puzzle parts, preparing for the next step, stitching. Gussets under the arm, gores at the skirt. Tailoring wasn't just a job. It was a delicate dance with fate. He looks out the window at the slowly brightening sky, lips moving silently in one last whispered blessing. The day is just beginning, but the tailor has already faced the hardest moment, the cut. One bad morning, one shaky hand, and you could ruin a garment that cost more than your house. A sleeve that looked fine on the table might twist or pull once it was sewn to the tunic. That's why tailors often used basting stitches first, loose, temporary seams they could adjust before making the final, irreversible ones. You can almost hear the snip-snip of threads being removed, adjustments being made, the tailor muttering to himself about crooked seams and fickle fabric. Tailors had a whole geometry of comfort hidden beneath the seams. Why? Because cloth is too expensive to waste, and because tight seam allowances mean a cleaner, slimmer garment. Some think people waddled around stiffly in their garments, restricted by layers of wool and linen. Others believe that clever tailoring, especially in places like Poland where winters were brutal, prioritized flexibility from the start. The truth, probably somewhere in between. But it also means less room for error. There's no forgiving a bad cut when you've left yourself only a finger's width of extra cloth. The rhythm of a tailor's life was repetitive, but that didn't mean it was easy. Using the wrong shears wasn't just bad form, it could dull the blade or fray the fabric. Some tailors even swore that shears absorbed the memory of the cloth they cut. Tailors prided themselves on invisible seams, so fine that you could barely see the thread. One medieval Polish poem describes a tailor who stitched so delicately that his seams held tighter than the prayers of monks. Is that an exaggeration? Probably, but you get the point. If you used wool shears on silk, you might confuse the edge. Is that superstition? Maybe, But when your livelihood depends on perfect cuts, you take no chances. Local weavers produce sturdy wool for everyday garments, but luxury materials? Those were rare and precious. Silk, velvet, brocade, these were fabrics you didn't mess up. The skill set overlapped more than you'd think. Both professions required sharp blades, steady hands, and a knack for small talk. There are records of 14th century tailors offering haircuts and beard trims to supplement their income. Some scholars argue this was a side hustle born of necessity. Others think it was just a way to keep clients coming back to the shop. After all, if you're already here for a new tunic, why not freshen up your look? Cutting into them was like operating on royalty with a kitchen knife. There are records of tailors petitioning local magistrates when clients refused to pay, but how often these petitions succeeded, that's still up for debate. In medieval Poland, fabric wasn't just expensive, it was practically currency. A bolt of fine wool or imported silk could be worth several months' wages for the average laborer. Tailors often worked on spec garments, meaning they cut and stitched before they were fully paid, trusting that the client wouldn't change their mind or suddenly disappear. Praying before cutting wasn't just spiritual insurance, it was financial survival. You imagine the tailor pausing, shears poised mid-air, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. A slip of the hand, a miscalculation of sleeve length. A merchant client deciding he suddenly prefers blue instead of crimson, even though the crimson cloth is already half-gutted on the table. Tailors walked a tightrope between craft and customer service, and sometimes it felt more like customer combat. Historians still argue about how tailors managed their financial risks. Some believe they required down payments for expensive commissions. And remember, cloth wasn't easy to come by. Speaking of knives, here's a quirky fact. Tailors sometimes own multiple pairs of shears, each reserved for a specific fabric type. You watch the tailor wipe his blades with a cloth soaked in goose fat, an old method for keeping iron from rusting. Another fringe tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some polished tailors were also part-time barbers. Yes, really. You can almost picture it, a nobleman sitting for a fitting, sleeves half-pinned to his tunic, while the tailor casually tidies up his sideburns. Multitasking. Medieval style. Back to the cutting table now. The tailor makes his next move, slicing the sleeve pieces with practiced care. You hover close, watching as the tailor arranges the cut sleeves alongside the bodice pieces, checking for symmetry. And yes, scholars still argue about just how much freedom of movement medieval clothing allowed. You smile, picturing a Krakow merchant twirling in his new coat, arms flailing slightly, testing the fit. Outside the shop, the sounds of mourning grow louder. Stitching was where the magic happened, but also where errors revealed themselves. And here's something to lull you deeper. Stitching wasn't just about function. It was about status. The tiniest stitches signaled the highest skill. As you drift further into this slow, rhythmic world, you realize why prayers were part of every step: cutting, stitching, fitting, adjusting. The tailor, now finished with the sleeves for today, wipes his brow and stretches his back. You stay there with him, watching the first rays of sunlight catch the edge of his scissors, gleaming softly like polished silver. The tailor's workshop breathes softly with the morning light, threads and fabric scraps scattered like fallen leaves across the wooden floor. You linger nearby, comfortably half asleep, watching him prepare the needle and thread for the next stage, assembly. But before he can stitch those crimson sleeves to the body of the tunic, there's something else he has to worry about: fashion trends. See, the problem wasn't just cutting correctly, it was cutting fashionably. Medieval Poland wasn't stuck in a timeless style freeze, despite what the dusty paintings suggest. In the 1300s, tight sleeves were all the rage, especially for men of status. The slimmer the sleeve, the higher your social standing, or at least, that was the idea. Why? Because human arms aren't straight sticks. They bend, flex, and twist. Some records suggest that apprentices had to spend years perfecting sleeves before they were allowed to cut them on their own. After all, sleeves weren't just decoration, they were social signals. To make a sleeve that actually fits, tailors had to curve the cut, building in room for the elbow and shoulder. This was advanced tailoring. Think of it as the 14th century version of ergonomic design. You can hear the soft hiss as the wax thread pulls through the fabric, snip like a lullaby in textile form. He starts the first basting stitches, tacking the sleeve to the bodice, checking the drape, adjusting the hang. After all, If you had sleeves so narrow you could barely move your arms, it proved you weren't doing any manual labor. The church elders weren't pleased. There was a sermon the following Sunday warning against vain and foreign fashions. Did that stop anyone? Of course not. Others think guilds enforce moral codes to stay in the church's good graces. After all, tailors didn't just risk losing customers, they could lose their workshop privileges if accused of promoting sinful luxury. But it added a layer of stress for the local tailors, who had to balance between pleasing fashion-forward clients and avoiding the wrath of the clergy. Did you hear about Lady Zofia? She ordered 3 new gowns with slashed sleeves, where tiny cuts in the outer layer revealed rich underlinings beneath. That's the eternal anxiety of his craft. Fashion waits for no one, bold, maybe even scandalous. But also fashionable, at least for the moment. Maybe next season everyone will want wider sleeves, or fur-lined cuffs, or embroidery so elaborate it takes months to finish. The tailor shrugs, already mentally preparing for the next trend. That's the life he's chosen. You had people to lift things for you. The tailor returns to his stool, humming quietly, content for now that the sleeves are cut, stitched, and at least this morning fashionable enough to survive the ever-turning wheel of medieval taste. The sleeves hang just right, narrow, but not too narrow, curved just enough to allow movement without sagging. He runs his fingers along the seams, checking for balance, for symmetry. There's a moment of satisfaction, a little sigh of relief. The tailor's work, in a way, was a form of silent diplomacy, helping clients navigate the tricky world of appearances without saying a word. In Poland, these laws were often vague, but occasionally enforced. But for tailors, it was another layer of stress added to the daily ritual of cutting and sewing. Sometimes only nobles could wear certain colors or fabrics. Sometimes merchants got away with bending the rules, especially if they donated generously to the right officials. Tailors had to keep track of all this, or risk getting caught in the middle. One wrong fabric choice, and you might find yourself explaining to the city magistrate why a middle-class client was strutting around in imported silk. That's why getting the sleeves right mattered so much. Fashion shifted constantly, often faster than you'd expect. Every cut sent a message. Were you fashionable or conservative? Wealthy or modest? Ambitious or resigned to your fate? Some think fashion filtered down from the royal court King Casimir the Great's wardrobe choices, setting the tone for everyone else. Others suggest that foreign merchants carried gossip about new cuts and styles, spreading them through trade routes like early influencers. One wrong snip and the garment might not fit over the elbow. Or worse, it might tear the first time the wearer reached for a mug of mead. That's where prayer came in again, because, frankly, geometry wasn't enough. Sometimes tailors needed divine intervention just to keep their clients' arms from popping seams at dinner. There's even evidence that tailors themselves acted as tastemakers, subtly nudging clients toward modern designs by adjusting sleeves or hems during fittings. Was it salesmanship or gentle manipulation? Probably both. What was stylish in Krakow last spring might be embarrassingly outdated by this autumn. Tailors had to keep up, or risk getting labeled old-fashioned, which, back then, could ruin your business. And let us be honest, no one wants to spend half a year's income on a tunic only to have their friends snicker behind their backs at the feast hall. Historians still argue about how polished tailors track these trends. You picture the tailor smoothing out the crimson sleeve pieces, thinking carefully about how wide to make them, but cutting narrow sleeves was risky. Here's a quirky detail. Medieval sleeve patterns often looked like boomerangs or bent croissants when laid flat. Scholars still debate whether every tailor understood this nuance or whether it was a secret passed down among masters. Too tight, you looked vain. Too loose, you looked sloppy. Too short. Well, let's just say people would assume you bought your clothes secondhand, which was basically medieval social doom. The tailor lifts his needle now, threading it carefully through beeswax to strengthen the thread. And here's where things get philosophical. Tailoring in medieval Poland wasn't just about making clothes fit bodies. It was about making clothes fit identities. Clothing was social armor, especially in cities like Krakow, where the rising merchant class used fashion to signal their new status. You can almost hear the tailor muttering to himself about last month's scandal at the market square, where a young merchant showed up in French-style sleeves, so why'd they dragged on the ground? Historians still debate how much influence the church actually had over day-to-day fashion choices. Some say tailors deliberately ignored clerical complaints, chasing profits over piety. You shift a little, cozy under your blanket, imagining the tailor's apprentice whispering gossip while holding fabric in place. The tailor sighs softly, adding more basting stitches, knowing that by the time he finished this crimson tunic, the trend might already be shifting again. There's also the question of sumptuary laws, those medieval rules that tried to control who could wear what. Again, scholars aren't sure how strictly these laws were enforced. Some think they were more about maintaining social order in theory than in practice. The tailor finishes his basting now, stepping back to look at the crimson tunic. But he knows better than to get too comfortable. Fashion will change again soon. As you drift deeper into sleep, you feel the rhythm of his work settling into your breathing stitch. Sigh, adjust, repeat. The tailor leans back, flexing his stiff fingers, eyes half closed as he listens to the soft creak of the workshop. You stay there with him, your mind comfortably foggy, following the quiet hum of the world outside. But even with the crimson tunic sleeves basted in place, the tailor's work isn't over, not by a long shot. That's the thing about medieval fittings. People fibbed just as much back then as they do now. Oh yes, tailor, I've definitely lost weight this Lent. Sure you have. Now comes the part that keeps him up at night, the fitting. Ah yes, fitting's the tailor's personal battlefield. Because no matter how carefully you cut or stitch, the moment of truth is always when the client tries it on. No mannequins, no dress forms, just you, standing very still while the tailor poked you with tiny metal points to mark adjustments. Others suggest tailors use them for everyone, since it saved time. The tailor watches closely. Do the sleeves pull at the shoulder seam? Do they ride up at the wrist? Are the gussets under the arm doing their job? Tailors competed fiercely for reputation. One bad fitting could ruin a career, but one good fitting? That could earn you a loyal client for life, or at least until the next fashion shift. Were tailors punished for making sleeves too grand for their clients? Some records suggest yes, with fines or public shaming. Maybe shorten the cuff by half a finger's breadth. Precision matters because once he stitches these changes, there's no going back. Cloth is expensive, remember, and seam allowances are small. Saint Homobonus, for instance, was the patron of tailors and cloth merchants, though he technically specialized in honesty and charity. He pulls the tunic off, handing it back to the tailor, who folds it carefully, mentally running through the list of changes he'll need to make before the final stitching. Some tailors kept detailed records, passing them down through generations. Others just trusted memory. Scholars still debate how organized medieval tailoring businesses really were. Were they early entrepreneurs with ledgers and files? Final stitching? Pressing the seams? Maybe adding embroidery if the client requests it later. The quiet victory of a fitting survived. His hands move automatically now, muscle memory guiding the needle, the scissors, the thread. Or was it all done by feel, by tradition, by habit? Probably a mix of both. It's a small victory, but the tailor knows better than to celebrate yet. There's still work to be done. Tailors often lit candles to him before difficult fittings, hoping for calm tempers and smooth fabric. Did it help? Well, it probably didn't hurt. One wrong snip, and you're looking at an unhappy client, or worse, a public complaint. Other sources hint that tailors found clever loopholes, like adding detachable sleeves that could be swapped out when no one was looking. Sometimes the local guild would mediate, stepping in to protect both sides. But inside the tailor shop, it's still quiet, the air filled with thread dust and soft concentration. Other times, it got personal grudges held for years over a single botched tunic. After all, who's going to inspect your cuffs at midnight in the tavern? It's a quiet little ballet of movement and observation, one that repeats day after day in tailor shops across medieval Poland. Some guild regulations dictated sleeve width and length depending on your social rank. A merchant might be allowed wider sleeves than a blacksmith, but not as wide as a nobleman's. The sleeve became a badge of class, stitched right into your tunic. Either way, getting poked was just part of the experience. You wanted the perfect sleeve, then stand still and let the tailor work. Clients learned quickly to hold their breath during this process or risk a jab in the ribs. Some tailors, the gentler ones, used chalk or wax instead, but pins were faster and, frankly, more dramatic. That's when all the hidden mistakes come tumbling out into the open. He's trying to feel for tension, for any hint of a twist in the fabric. And of course, the client isn't helping. He's shifting, complaining about the cold, adjusting his belt, asking if the sleeves make his arms look too thin, too tight here, too loose there. Sleeves twisted, shoulders sagging, you name it. You imagine the tailor wiping his hands nervously on his apron as the client enters a Krakow merchant, maybe, belly slightly larger than he admitted during the initial measurements. Historians still argue about how measurements were taken in medieval Poland. Some think tailors used corded measuring bands, marked with knots or colored threads, rather than standardized rulers. More like a piece of shiny metal or a pool of water in a bowl, if he's lucky. The tailor slips the tunic over his client's head, smoothing the fabric, gently tugging the sleeves into place. And here's the tricky bit: medieval clothing didn't have zippers or elastic. Everything had to be fitted just so, allowing enough room to move, but not enough to look sloppy. Others believe measurements were done more by eye and experience than by exact numbers. There are even theories that tailors used parts of their own body's elbow to fingertip, for example as quick measuring guides. Is that reliable? Well, it depends on the tailor. The merchant stands in front of the mirror well, not really a mirror, since polished glass is rare in this era. You watch as the tailor checks the sleeves, folding them back at the cuff, running his hands along the seams. Here's a fun tidbit to lull you deeper. Tailors sometimes used pins directly on the client's body during fittings. Scholars still debate how widespread this practice was. Some think pins were reserved for wealthy clients who could afford custom fittings. The merchant raises his arms experimentally, twisting left and right. You can almost hear the merchant grumbling about how the last tailor botched his doublet, leaving the sleeves too short. That's why he came here instead. Speaking of fashion, here's something odd. In certain Polish towns, sleeves became status symbols in their own right. Historians still argue about how strictly these sleeve laws were enforced. You picture the tailor, carefully marking the adjustments with a bit of soapstone. Just a little taken in at the wrist, a pinch more room at the elbow. The public complaints. Krakow's city records are peppered with them. Clients accusing tailors of ruining expensive cloth, tailors accusing clients of refusing to pay. And here's a fringe detail to lull you even further. Some tailors kept patron saints for moments like this. Back in the workshop, the merchant finally relaxes, satisfied with the adjustments. You stay with him, he scribbles notes in the margins of his wax tablet, recording sleeve measurements, fabric types, and client preferences. Outside, the day has fully arrived now, merchants calling out prices, church bells tolling, the smell of fresh bread drifting in from the street. The tailor sets the crimson tunic aside, sleeves basted, adjustments marked, mind already thinking of the next steps. You breathe with him, matching his pace, letting the rhythm of the tailor's day lull you deeper into rest. Sleeves measured, adjustments made. The merchant's tunic, sleeves pinned and adjusted, rests folded on the wooden workbench. You stay close, watching the tailor return to his stool, rubbing his temples like someone who's just finished a delicate surgery. But don't get too comfortable, there's more sewing ahead. Others point to religious symbolism, since red often appeared in church robes and royal regalia. Imagine collecting thousands of little bugs, drying them, crushing them into powder, and then using that powder to color your cloth. That's why crimson cost a small fortune. Bright colors showed stains less than pale fabrics did, which was useful when you only owned one or two tunics. Not just for his hands to stay steady, but maybe also for a bit of protection from jealous rivals. It leaves a trail of tiny holes in the fabric, like a secret dotted map. A pair of scissors blessed by a priest, a needle wrapped in a scrap of old wedding cloth. This is the part of tailoring most people never see. The slow, careful work that holds everything together. Tailoring guilds in medieval Poland weren't just friendly craft clubs. They enforced quality standards. Inspectors sometimes visited workshops unannounced, checking the seams, measuring the cuts, making sure apprentices weren't doing master-level work without permission. If the guild found sloppy stitching, the tailor could be fined or, worse, lose his license to practice. No one at the feast hall will notice these stitches, but if they're done wrong, the tailor hums softly as he works, pressing the fabric, setting the stitches. It's a sensory moment, the smell of warm wool, the hiss of steam, the soft crackle of fire in the brazier. Color, superstition, stitching, and steam. The crimson tunic is almost ready, sleeves perfectly aligned, social meaning stitched right into the seams. Others believe the inspections were real and regular, part of the guild's grip on urban life. Tailors loved that story, even though it's a little grim for bedtime. They saw it as a reminder of dignity in craft, even in the face of hardship. Plus, it made their daily struggle seem tame by comparison. He'll probably sit quietly for a while now, counting his needles, winding his threads, muttering a final prayer of thanks that the crimson tunic is almost finished and that he didn't mess it up. You might stab yourself with a needle, but at least you weren't being roasted on a gridiron. Either way, your tailor isn't taking chances. Every stitch is a quiet rebellion against disaster. The sleeve will tear the first time the merchant raises a toast. That's why the tailor moves slowly, humming under his breath, fingers steady as clockwork. You're still there, comfortably sleepy, tracing the rhythm of his stitching. In, out, in, out. The crimson fabric takes shape under his hands, the sleeves finally becoming part of the whole tunic. Even a pin supposedly kissed by Saint Hedwig's relics. Did these objects actually help? Who knows? But when you're cutting fabric that costs more than your workshop rent, a little superstition feels justified. These marks guide the needle, especially on tricky pieces like curved sleeves or decorative cuffs. Not every tailor used a pricking wheel, some preferred chalk, others just trusted their eye. But for delicate fabrics like crimson-dyed wool, the wheel was safer. Less smearing, fewer mistakes. Remember, Krakow tailors competed fiercely. Stealing clients, copying patterns, it happened all the time. There's even a record of a tailor accusing another of witchcraft after losing a wealthy patron. Was it true, or just sour grapes? Historians still argue about that case. But red had another hidden bonus. It was thought to protect against the evil eye. Some people believed that wearing red, especially on the arms or shoulders, deflected curses or bad luck. Superstition woven right into the seams. If you were wearing sleeves dyed like this, you were basically announcing, "Yes, I spent half a year's earnings on this outfit, please notice me." There's even speculation that it's linked to ancient pagan rituals, where red signified life, blood, and vitality. Did medieval merchants think about all that when they ordered red tunics? Probably not, but they knew it made them stand out. The crimson fabric isn't just about sleeves and seams, it's about status and symbolism, too. See, in medieval Poland, colors weren't just aesthetic choices, they carried meaning. Sumptuary laws occasionally tried to restrict who could wear which colors. Crimson was often reserved for the upper classes, though merchants found loopholes. You could mix a cheaper red with wool instead of silk, or dye just the sleeves while leaving the rest of the tunic plain. The tailor had to walk that fine line, helping clients show off without getting them fined or shamed from the pulpit. Red, especially the deep crimson kind your tailor is working with, was a power color. It wasn't just, "Oh, I like red today." It was a bold, expensive statement. Wearing crimson told the world you had money, connections, and the guts to flaunt both. Historians still argue about how red became so closely tied to prestige. Some think it's because the dyes were hard to get, and crimson wasn't cheap. The dye usually came from Kermes beetles, tiny insects harvested from oak trees in the Mediterranean. Of course, the church sometimes frowned on these displays, and there was a practical side, too. You can almost hear the tailor mumbling a quiet prayer as he threads his needle again. The tailor picks up his pricking wheel, a tiny spiked roller used to mark stitching lines. Here's a quirky tidbit to lull you deeper. Some tailors kept lucky tools, passing them down like family heirlooms. The tailor starts stitching now, using the backstitch tiny, overlapping stitches that create a strong, almost invisible seam. And there's another reason he's focused: guild inspections. Scholars still debate how strict these inspections were. Some think guild records exaggerated their authority to scare members into compliance. As he sews, his mind wanders maybe to the legend of St. Lawrence, who was said to have sewn his own martyr's robe before being burned alive. Outside, the daylight fades, candles flicker to life, and the tailor's workshop glows softly with the warm light of beeswax. And then comes the pressing, no irons like we know today, just heated stones wrapped in cloth, gently run over the seams to flatten them. You might think the day is ending here, but for a medieval tailor, there's always one more thing to do. Outside, the street quiets down, and you sink deeper into your pillow, following the rhythm of the tailor's day. The workshop air is heavy now, thick with wool dust and candle wax. You sit quietly as the tailor wraps up the crimson tunic, smoothing the sleeves one last time. They prepared garments for life's milestones. Births, weddings, funerals, religious feasts, each one needed the right outfit. And when the stakes were that high, the sewing became sacred. You weren't just stitching fabric, you were stitching memory. Tiny words hidden inside the seams, like whispered charms. May your days be plentiful, or love grows as stitches do. Something like, Lord, guide the needle, protect the cloth, keep the customer from changing their mind. For example, you weren't supposed to start a wedding outfit on certain days like Fridays or Saints' feast days because it was thought to bring bad luck. Some tailors followed this rule strictly, while others, well, let's just say deadlines, sometimes trumped superstition. Historians still argue about how often these rules were bent. You smile a little at that last part. Tailors, like anyone in customer service, had to deal with second-guessers and last-minute demands. Some things never change. Of course, historians still debate whether this was widespread or just a few romantic examples scribbled in old texts. He counts the lengths of thread, the number of needles, the little packets of beeswax for conditioning the thread. It's not just busy work, it's part of his nightly ritual. Thread was waxed to keep it from tangling, making stitches smoother and stronger. Some tailors even believed that waxed thread stitched faster, though that might just be wishful thinking. Because medieval tailors weren't just sewing, they were fabric connoisseurs. They'd gather in one workshop, light extra candles, share wine or mead, and sew together until the garments were done. Some think they doubled as subtle union meetings, letting tailors discuss wages and workshop politics away from official ears. Others believe it was just an excuse to finish rush orders while complaining about picky clients. Was it practical? Maybe. Was it a chance to swap gossip and needlework tips? Absolutely. They had to know the difference between Polish wool and Flemish broadcloth, between Italian silk and Hungarian linen. Shears were precious tools, often custom-made and passed down through families. He wipes his hands on his apron, stands slowly, stretching his back. Inside the workshop, though, there's still a gentle hum of life, the creak of the bench, the soft rustle of fabric, the whisper of thread slipping through cloth. The crimson tunic is finished, the wedding kirtle awaits, and tomorrow will bring another round of measuring, cutting, and careful praying. Some tailors even named their shears, like you might name a favorite car or a beloved pet. A good pair could cut through thick wool without fraying the edges, while a bad pair. Needles and prayers, silk and secrets, sleeves stitched for weddings, for status, for stories only the cloth will ever hear. Well, let's not think about that right before bed. They could tell by touch whether a bolt of cloth had been fulled properly, or whether someone had tried to cheat by mixing cheaper fibers in. Did every bride get secret messages in her sleeves? Probably not. But some did, and those hidden stitches lingered long after the wedding feast ended. He'll deliver it tomorrow, maybe after Mass, and yes, he'll probably stop by the guild hall first, just in case there's news of new orders or rumors about price changes. Cloth costs fluctuate constantly, and keeping up with dye shipments from abroad is part of the job. But before you drift too far, there's another layer to this sleepy little world. Tailoring wasn't just crafted, was ceremony. That might sound dramatic, but think about it. In medieval Poland, tailors did more than sew. When washed, the clay dissolved, leaving a flimsy scrap behind. Imagine spending weeks sewing a tunic, only to have it fall apart after the first rain. Nightmare fuel for any tailor. Right now, the tailor's mind drifts to the next commission waiting on his bench, a wedding kirtle. The bride's mother came by last week, bustling into the workshop with a basket of goose feathers and gossip. The fabric is pale green, lined with fur for warmth. But the sleeves, that's where the magic happens. He might use couching stitches, where the thread is laid flat on the fabric and tacked down with tiny cross stitches. It's easier on delicate cloth and creates shimmering designs, especially with metallic threads. Gold work embroidery wasn't just for nobles. Wealthy merchants in Krakow often commissioned it too, adding sparkle to their sleeves and collars. In Krakow, bridal sleeves were often detachable, tied on with ribbons so the bride could swap them out for special occasions. And here's a sleepy little detail. Sometimes those bridal sleeves were embroidered with riddles or blessings. The tailor strokes his chin, thinking about the embroidery patterns he'll need for that project. You glance around the workshop, noticing a worn parchment pinned to the wall. It's not a pattern, but a prayer for steady hands. Guild regulations often dictated how and when tailors could work on special garments. You watch the tailor roll up the crimson tunic carefully, wrapping it in linen to protect it from dust. Speaking of cloth, let's wander a little further into that world, shall we? There is even a record from Poznag, where a tailor sued a merchant for selling him false clothy fabric that had been weighted with clay to make it feel heavier and more luxurious. Back in the workshop, the tailor sharpens his shears again, the scrape of metal on stone soothing in the quiet. The tailor checks his inventory next, running his fingers over the shelves of folded cloth. And here's a quirky image to lull you deeper. In some Polish villages, tailors held midnight sewing circles, especially before festivals. Historians still debate whether these midnight circles were guild-sponsored or just informal social events. Your tailor probably took part in those late-night stitches now and then. But tonight, he's alone, humming softly as he ties off his thread. Outside, the streets of Krakow grow quieter. The market stalls are closed, the torches in the city square sputtering low. You let yourself drift with it, warm and safe, floating in the slow rhythm of the tailor's world. The candles burn low, casting long shadows on the tailor's workbench. You stay still, half dreaming now, but the tailor is far from finished. Tomorrow's orders swirl in his mind. And here's where things get interesting. Sleeves weren't just fashion, they were political statements. It was a conscious choice, a subtle nod to the bustling, upwardly mobile urban life of Krakow. Historians still argue whether this was a form of silent rebellion against the old feudal elite, or just convenience. Probably a bit of both. Sounds ridiculous, right? But in medieval Poland, the cut and shape of your sleeves could signal everything from your trade status to your political allegiance. He's watched sleeves go in and out of fashion like sourdough bread starters one year tight, the next year enormous. There's a councilman's robe coming due next week, and the man specifically requested modest sleeves with proper Christian decorum. In Krakow, there are records of tailors being fined for wasteful cuts when too much cloth was used on oversized sleeves. Tailoring was about efficiency as much as elegance. You had to know how to get the most out of every bolt of fabric, like a medieval version of Tetris. And if you accidentally cut the sleeve too short, well, that's why tailors prayed before picking up the shears. That's code for no flashy silks, no gaudy embroidery. Tailors use these to hold fabric still while cutting, especially in workshops without large cutting tables. You're still cozy, drifting deeper into the tailor's rhythm, the gentle back and forth of cloth and scissors, cloth and scissors. Tailors needed to keep their voices smooth for all the client negotiations, so warm tea was part of the job, not just a comfort. There is even a recipe in an old guild manual for a tea that supposedly keeps your hands from cramping. Does it work? Well, historians still debate that one too. There's something almost hypnotic about it. You imagine the tailor in a kind of moving meditation, his hands steady, his mind calculating fabric yields and seam allowances. Some tailors had pattern weights carved into shapes, little animals, saints, even tiny fabric shears. It's another blend of utility and charm, something to soothe the nerves during high-stakes cuts. He thinks about all the sleeves he's made noble, merchant, bridal, burial. But for now, he lets his mind wander, tracing the shapes of sleeves in his imagination. Angel sleeves, fur cuffs, secret embroidered messages. Political statements stitched into silk, each one stitched for a specific moment in someone's life. Some of those sleeves are probably still hanging in chests somewhere, forgotten but intact. Others might have been cut down into rags or baby clothes. Cloth had to be reused. Nothing went to waste. On his wrist, there's a tiny tattoo of scissors, barely visible. Some tailors did that, a quiet mark of their trade, inked in places customers wouldn't see. Was it common? You nestle deeper into your blanket, wrapped in the fabric of centuries, following the gentle arc of a sleeve from sketch to stitch to social symbol. Historians still debate that. Some think it was a fringe practice, more popular with journeymen than masters. But either way, it's there, a permanent sign of craft and identity, just clean, narrow cuffs. But of course, the cloth itself will still be top-quality Italian wool, so modesty is relative. And tailoring mistakes weren't just bad for business. They could get you accused of insulting someone's social rank. Nobody wanted that. Remember those wide, flowing sleeves the nobles wore. They weren't just for drama, they showed off wealth, sure, but they also symbolized autonomy. It's a commission from a visiting German merchant who wants to look fashionable but stay warm in Krakow's icy wines. Some call it fraud, others call it survival. Historians still argue about the extent of this practice, but your tailor knows exactly where to cut corners and where not to. The tailor smiles quietly. Fur-lined sleeves are a nice, profitable job, but they're tricky. You have to cut the fur so the nap runs the right direction, or the sleeves will look lopsided and feel rough when you slide your arm in. Imagine giving your sweetheart one of your embroidered sleeves before heading off to war or pilgrimage. It was like leaving a part of yourself behind, wrapped in thread and cloth. Some scholars think this is where the phrase "wearing your heart on your sleeve" comes from, though of course, historians still debate that. A sort of fabric-based flex, saying, "I have enough land and power that I don't need to roll up my sleeves and work." Meanwhile, merchants and city officials often preferred narrow sleeves, practical for writing contracts, counting coins, or riding horses. Your tailor knows this sleeve politics all too well. He has learned when to suggest a tighter cuff or when to let a nobleman's sleeve billow like a tapestry. There's a dusty scroll tucked behind the tailor's workbench. On it are diagrams of sleeve patterns going back decades, maybe even centuries. He learned them as an apprentice, tracing the lines by candlelight until they were burned into his memory. Some sleeves are tied on, called sleevelets, others are cut in one piece with the tunic. And then there's the angel sleeve along, draping, almost dragging on the ground. Not great for Krakow mud, but perfect for ceremonial processions. Here's a quirky tidbit to lull you deeper. Sometimes, people carried detachable sleeves as love tokens. The tailor yawns, rubbing his eyes, but his mind keeps stitching. Guild rules sometimes specified sleeve dimensions, especially during times of fabric shortage. The tailor's own sleeves are rolled up now, his arms bare in the candlelight. You hear the soft rustle of parchment as the tailor unrolls a new pattern, this one for a winter cloak with fur-lined sleeves. Some tailors secretly line sleeves with scraps of cheaper fur, keeping the expensive sable or marten for the parts people could see. Was that ethical? Depends who you ask. He reaches for his pattern weight, a smooth river stone polished by years of handling. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters. He stops for a sip of herbal tea, probably spiced with honey and mint. As he sips, the tailor gazes at the sleeve patterns spread before him. The tailor sighs softly, setting down his cup. Tomorrow will bring another round of measuring, another round of cautious cuts. Outside, the city clock tower tolls softly, marking the late hour. The tailor leans back, eyes half closed, letting the quiet of the workshop settle over him like a warm cloak. But sleep will have to wait, because in this world, sleeves weren't just fashion or status symbols. Sometimes, they were literal survival gear. Think about it. Medieval Polish winters weren't gentle. It's like when you re-under a blanket and you tuck your arms in for maximum coziness, except this was out in the frozen streets, trying not to get frostbite on your way to the bakery. Snow piled up in Krakow's streets, rivers froze, and icy wines swept through the market squares. Tailors had to design sleeves that kept people alive, not just stylish. That's why winter garments often featured extra long sleeves, sometimes with mid-leg extensions you could fold over your hands. She loved them, twirling in circles until the bells rang like a tiny festival. Of course, not everyone appreciated the noise. Putting a seam on the outside of a sleeve can let wine sneak in. They'd cut a rough version first à toile, usually out of cheap linen, and test it directly on the client. Did every tailor make test sleeves, or was it just a high-end service for wealthy clients? Some records suggest that city guilds required test fittings for ceremonial garments, like robes for judges or church officials. The last thing you wanted was a bishop stuck in the cathedral, unable to raise his arms for the blessing. Not the dusty white classroom kind you're looking at. Tailor's chalk, tinted with red ochre, so it shows up against pale fabrics. Medieval tailors often made their templates flexible so they could adapt the same pattern for multiple clients. Tailors had to be resourceful, working with what was available. If the silk shipment from Venice got stuck in the mountains, well, you learned to make velvet sleeves look just as fancy. Flip it one way, you get a merchant's sleeve. Shift it another way, you get a soldier's gambeson arm, padded and ready for armor straps. The tailor rolls up the fabric carefully, tucking the sleeve pieces into a linen bundle for tomorrow. Some tailors preferred soapstone, but chalk was cheaper and easier to find. The tailor rubs it between his fingers, feeling for cracks. He thinks about all the sleeve disasters he has seen. The merchant who insisted on sleeves so tight he couldn't lift his arms at the banquet. The noblewoman whose fur cuffs accidentally caught fire from a festival torch. No injuries, just a lot of panicked flailing and some singed ermine. Maybe a little extra wool stock wouldn't hurt either. There's even a story about a Krakow councilman who tried to store snacks in his sleeve at a meeting. Crumbs everywhere. The tailor's workshop fades into a soft blur of candlelight and cloth where stitches hold warmth, prayers float in the air, and sleeves are never just sleeves, they're survival. Historians don't write that part down, but tailors remember. If it crumbles, he'll have to grind a new batch tomorrow. Adjustments happened in real time, with the tailor tugging and pinning, and sometimes even arguing about arm mobility. He's double-checking the grain of the fabric, making sure it follows the proper line so the sleeve hangs naturally. That might sound poetic, but there's truth in it. A well-cut sleeve makes a tunic or robe come alive, flowing with the wearer's movement. A bad sleeve, it turns every gesture into a chore. Cut it wrong, and the cloth will twist, pulling at the elbow or bunching near the wrist. Get it right, and the sleeve will drape smoothly, like water over stone. After all, sleeves aren't just decorations, you have to live in them. Better to shift it under the arm or along the back of the sleeve, where the cloth overlaps and traps warmth. Tailors learned this from experience, not textbooks. Cold fingers teach you quickly. The parish priest once scolded the family for bringing a walking bell tower to church. Still, the bells stayed on for winter walks, early medieval hoodie hacks, if you will. It wasn't just for fun. Bells were thought to ward off evil spirits. Plus, if your kid wandered off in the market, you could literally hear them coming back. Some cloaks had slits at the shoulders so the wearer could pull their arms inside, wrapping up completely against the cold. Historians still debate whether these winter designs were first invented by tailors in Poland or borrowed from neighboring regions like Bohemia or Hungary. But one thing's clear, Krakow tailors knew how to layer wool over linen, fur over wool, sleeves lined with felt or even padded with down feathers when they could afford it. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Your tailor has a commission right now for a merchant's traveling coat meant for horseback rides between towns. The sleeves will be wide at the shoulder but taper at the wrist to keep out wind. There will be tiny hidden pockets sewn into the lining just big enough for coins, keys, or maybe a small charm to ward off bandits. Superstition still clings to the seams, and here is a quirky bedtime image for you. Some sleeves had little bells sewn into the cuffs, especially for children. The tailor chuckles softly at the memory of making those jingling sleeves for his niece. There's another detail your tailor knows by heart. Seam placement matters in the cold. In fact, medieval Polish tailors had a trick for checking sleeve fit without modern mannequins. Historians still debate how standardized this practice was. Tonight, your tailor spreads out a half-finished sleeve for inspection, running his fingers along the seams. He hums softly, thinking about his old master, who used to say, "The sleeve is the soul of the garment." There's a tiny drawer in the tailor's bench, and tonight he opens it slowly, pulling out a piece of chalk. As he marks the fabric, you notice something else. The patterns are reversible. That adaptability was crucial in medieval Poland, where fabric imports could be delayed by snow, war, or banditry. The tailor sets his chalk down, flexing his fingers. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters again. Your eyelids get heavier, lulled by the rhythm of cloth and chalk and memory. He mutters a quick prayer under his breath, not for wealth or fame, but for steady hands and kind clients. You breathe in softly, imagining yourself wrapped in one of those winter cloaks, sleeves snug around your wrists, the world quiet beneath a blanket of snow. The tailor blows out one candle, but leaves another flickering, its soft light dancing over piles of cloth. There's one more task tonight: repair work. Because in medieval Poland, clothes weren't disposable. Sleeves were mended, patched, and sometimes completely rebuilt, like Frankenstein's monster, but in velvet and wool. You watch as the tailor picks up a worn tunic sleeve. It's threadbare at the elbow, where fabric always goes first. People leaned on desks, clutched reins, hoisted barrels. The elbow took the hit. So, tailors developed clever fixes. The tailor picks out the old stitches carefully, saving as much of the original fabric as possible. Cloth was precious, after all, imported wool from Flanders. That was like the iPhone of textiles, expensive, and sometimes months in transit. You didn't just toss it when it wore thin. They were precious tools, often stored in carved cases made from bone, wood, or even silver if you were fancy. Losing a needle was a big deal. Some tailors prayed to Saint Homobonus, the patron saint of cloth workers, to keep track of their tools. It's a lullaby, really, passed down in tailoring circles as a kind of work chant. It's almost meditative, like the old monks copying manuscripts by candlelight. You get the sense that this isn't just about saving a tunicate as about preserving stories. Each repaired sleeve carries a history, the dinner where the wine stain happened. Not a long one, just enough to seal the work and hope the sleeve holds through winter. Somewhere, someone is still awake, maybe a baker starting the morning dough, maybe another tailor finishing a deadline. But here, in this small workshop, the world is quiet except for the sound of cloth. Then he smooths the fabric between his hands, checking the drape, the seam tension, the feel of the cuff. The market day when someone caught it on a cartwheel. In this world, no sleeve is wasted, no cloth forgotten. Everything can be mended, even time. The winter when the fur lining wore thin from too many cold walks. It'll go back to its owner tomorrow, stitched with care, patched with patience. No one will know how late he stayed up, except maybe you, and now you're part of the story too, a quiet observer in the candlelight. Songs helped keep the rhythm steady, especially during long nights of repairs. Everything in its place, ready for the next day. Is that historically confirmed? Well, scholars debate it, but the tradition existed in parts of Europe. Both regions used similar techniques, but Polish tailors had to adjust for the heavy fabrics of Northern Europe. Wool doesn't behave like silk. Not all clients knew this happened. Was it a guild tradition or personal habit? Historians still debate that. But tonight, your tailor smiles softly and slides a tiny M into the seam, his own private mark, lost to the eye but stitched into time. He runs the thread through a ball of beeswax first, making it smooth and water-resistant. The right sleeve, that might attract jealousy. So, most tailors started with the left. Just in case, do modern historians believe this? Well, they argue about how widespread the practice was, but plenty of workshop notes mention it. Wax thread slides through wool like a dream, less likely to snag. Plus, it smells faintly of honey, a tiny sensory bonus in an otherwise cold workshop. It bulks up, it stretches oddly, and if you patch it wrong, the seam turns into a miniature sausage roll, bulging under the arm. Inside are tiny scraps of silk, velvet, and wool, the tailor's emergency stash. Picture this: a merchant orders bright red patches on a gray tunic, signaling both his wealth because he can afford repairs and his humility because he's not too proud to wear mended clothes. Historians still argue whether this was genuine modesty or just another way to show off. Probably both. Need to patch a sleeve without it looking like a disaster. Grab a matching scrap from the box. Some tailors even kept these pieces sorted by color and texture, like medieval paint swatches, practical and a little bit obsessive. One was the patch insert, a small diamond-shaped piece of cloth sewn into the underarm or elbow. It wasn't just for reinforcement, it let the sleeve bend more easily. Modern clothes still use this trick. Sometimes think of gussets in athletic wear. There's debate among historians whether these inserts started in Krakow or came from Moorish Spain. Tonight's repair job is on a sleeve with a fraying cuff, the lining poking out like a scraggly little beard. There's a small box near the workbench labeled offcuts. Of course, not every repair was about practicality. Some clients wanted their sleeve patches to be deliberately visible. You hear the gentle scrape of a bone needle case opening. That's right, needles weren't just loose in drawers. Your tailor threads a wax linen cord, choosing it over silk thread for durability. As he stitches, the tailor hums an old song under his breath. Something about a princess with velvet sleeves to long to carry her own lantern. The tailor's fingers move automatically now, sewing tiny, even stitches that disappear into the fabric. Some tailors secretly added embroidered initials inside repaired sleeves, like hidden signatures. There is also a superstition about repaired sleeves you might like as you drift closer to sleep. People believe that patching the left sleeve first would bring good luck. The tailor ties off the last stitch with a small prayer under his breath. He looks out the window, eyes soft. In the distance, Krakow sleeps under a layer of mist, the rooftops blurred in the moonlight. The tailor wraps the mended tunic in parchment, ready for delivery. Before he turns in, the tailor checks his tools one last time, sliding needles back into their case, smoothing the chalk, folding the offkits. Outside, the wind has calmed. You can almost hear the soft rustle of fur-lined sleeves as the city dreams 1,000 tiny fabric stories floating through the night. You breathe slower now, wrapped in the gentle rhythm of stitch after stitch, patch after patch. The candle burns lower, pooling wax along the base of its holder. But before sleep claims the tailor, there's one final sleep problem to consider tonight: fashion mistakes. Because let's face it, no matter the century, people have always made terrible fashion choices. Imagine walking through a July market with literal fur bags attached to your arms. Did he sweat? Cho? Absolutely. Did he care? Not one bit. Either way, polished tailors had to adapt, creating patterns that balanced volume with function. You couldn't make sleeves so big they knocked over church candles. That's how you end up in the town records for arson. Fashion is suffering. Even back then, in medieval Poland, sleeve trends didn't just follow practicality. Sometimes they veered straight into the ridiculous. Take the late 14th century fad for bag sleeves. There's a story, half rumor, half truth, about a Krakow merchant's wife who requested sleeves so long they trailed behind her like a train. She wanted to make an entrance at the midsummer festival. The tailor warned her it wasn't practical. She ignored him. Picture sleeves so enormous they looked like someone strapped flour sacks to their arms. Did the tailor enjoy a private moment of smug satisfaction? In medieval Poland, the color and cut of your sleeve could signal your profession, marital status, or political allegiance. Red sleeves might mean wealth or merchant class. Blue might show loyalty to a noble house. Think about a knight in Krakow preparing for a skirmish, only to realize his gambeson sleeves are too tight. Can't lift his sword properly. That's a tailor's nightmare. He hasn't made one in years, but he keeps them, just in case another war breaks out. In this world, fashion and battle are never too far apart. In fact, records from the Polish-Lithuanian campaigns mention soldiers complaining about ill-fitting gear. Some tailors traveled with armies, adjusting sleeves and padding on the go. In his workshop, sleeves tell stories of vanity, bravery, foolishness, and survival. And you, sitting here quietly in the soft hush of night, are part of that tapestry now, gently unraveling into sleep. A good tailor in the field could mean the difference between victory and embarrassing defeat. The candle is down to a stub now, flickering softly. Outside, the streets of Krakow are still. The last of the fashion disasters have been patched, the sleeves repaired, the trends noted. Tomorrow, there will be new commissions, new mistakes, new fabrics to cut. A widow's sleeve might be narrow and unadorned, while a bride's could be embroidered with tiny silver threads. The bigger the sleeve roll, the more muscle you seem to have, whether or not you actually worked out. Did it work? Well, historians still argue about whether it fooled anyone, but the trend stuck around for a while. But there's a catch. Not everyone followed the rules. Oh yes. A bishop wants new ceremonial robes with detachable sleeves for summer festivals. A merchant's wife needs new cuffs after ruining hers with candle wax. And a young apprentice new to the guild has asked for advice on cutting bag sleeves without accidentally making them into kites. The tailor smiles at that one, but he still repaired the sleeves the next day. In Krakow, there were official decrees limiting the use of imported silks, especially for sleeves, but enforcement was patchy at best. The city council might fine you for wearing golden thread if you were a commoner, but if your cousin worked in the guild, you might just get a wink and a warning. Business is business. They dragged in soup bowls, knocked over candles, and occasionally caught small animals. People loved them. Your tailor remembers making a pair for a Krakow nobleman who insisted on lining his bag sleeves with fur, even though it was midsummer. Did the tailors' guilds police sleeve shapes like medieval fashion cops? Or did they mostly turn a blind eye as long as clients paid on time? The records are fuzzy, and tailors were pragmatic. He sometimes stitched expensive linings on the inside of sleeves where only the wearer could feel the luxury. It was like medieval stealth wealth because sometimes showing off wasn't worth the risk. After all, if a wealthy client wanted forbidden embroidery, you weren't going to refuse the coin. Historians still argue whether these bag sleeves started in Poland or drifted in from Burgundy, where court fashion got a little extravagant. There was also the slashed sleeve trend, where outer layers were cut to reveal the under fabric. Scholars love to debate that over coffee. Some records suggest Krakow merchants imported the idea along with Venetian cloth shipments. Others argue it was a homegrown style that spread outward. Either way, tailors weren't always thrilled about these trends. Cutting up perfectly good cloth felt like a sin. Picture a sleeve sliced open in ribbons, so a bright silk or velvet peeked through underneath. It looked cool, sort of like medieval air conditioning, but it wasn't exactly durable. If you weren't careful, the slashes would fray and unravel, leaving you with a ragged mess instead of a fashion statement. The tailor sighs at the memory of repairing one of those disasters. A young knight came in after a joust with his sleeves completely shredded, not by his opponent, but by his own outfit. Try explaining that to your friends at the tavern. Did Polish tailors invent the slash sleeve look, or did they copy it from Italian courtiers? Of course, some clients pushed things even further. By the end of the night, her sleeves were covered in mud, candle wax, and one unfortunate chicken feather. People whispered about it for weeks. Sometimes, sleeves even carried coded meanings. Historians still debate how strictly sleeve codes were enforced. There's also the matter of sumptuary laws, those medieval rules meant to control who could wear what. Your tailor remembers the quiet dance of discretion versus display. But sleeve disasters weren't always about fashion. Sometimes, they happened in battle. There's a quirky side note here. Some knights requested padded sleeve rolls at the shoulder, not just for armor support, but for pure intimidation. Your tailor has a few of those old armor padding patterns tucked away, rolled in parchment at the back of his bench. Tonight, as he finishes his notes for the day, he scribbles down a list of upcoming sleeve repairs and commissions. He leans back, rubbing his eyes. For now, though, the tailor breathes slowly, letting the day fade. The tailor finally stretches, joints cracking softly in the candlelit silence. His work for today is done almost. Before sleep, there is one last ritual that no tailor in medieval Krakow would skip: sleeve measurements for tomorrow's clients. Because if you think modern sizing is chaotic, wait until you deal with medieval tailoring. 1 knot for the wrist, 2 for the elbow, 3 for the shoulder. One tailor might use the span of his own hand as a guide, while another might swear by the width of a goose quill for fine adjustments. Simple, right? Well, not exactly. People fidgeted during fittings. Some puffed up their chests to seem stronger, accidentally making their arms look longer. Others slouched, ending up with sleeves that dragged over their hands like sad wizard robes. Did that belief start in Krakow? Historians debate that one, but written workshop notes mention tailors quietly redoing pleats in the middle of the night, just in case. For example, when someone requested sleeves for negotiation, it meant they wanted cuffs loose enough to hide gestures, subtle finger twitches, or secret sign language used in merchant deals. Did all tailors know about this code? Historians still argue, but guild rumors suggest some masters were in on the trick. Better safe than sorry when you're stitching for the upper class. Some are simple line drawings, others filled with detailed notes, like allow for winter underlayers or client S left arm, longer than right adjust pattern. In winter, they wanted narrow cuffs to block out the cold. Tailors didn't always make new patterns from scratch, they reused and adapted old ones, tweaking curves and seams like editing a favorite recipe. Designed for a client with a crooked arm after a riding accident, that extra half-inch in the cuff. Added for a merchant who always wore 2 rings on his right hand. In the stillness, the tailor closes his eyes for just a moment, imagining the sleeves he'll cut tomorrow, the pleats, the folds, the seams that will stretch quietly across time. Tailors became experts at noticing details no one else saw. In fact, some nobles tested tailors by asking for impossible measurements just to see if the craftsman would push back. Fail the test, and you might lose a wealthy client. Pass it, and you'd gain lifelong business. Some patterns were passed down for generations, a kind of family treasure. It's half prayer, half joke, but in this world, every little ritual matters. He wraps the measuring cord carefully, tucks the parchments away, and folds the day behind him like a finished garment. Imagine inheriting your great-grandfather's sleeve design like a medieval blueprint. But Krakow weather, unpredictable. The tailor remembers a January so warm that half the city wore short sleeves. Did climate shifts affect tailoring patterns? Why? Because he believed that changing sleeve width adjusted his luck. Did it work? Well, the men ruled for decades, so maybe there's something to it. Or maybe it was just comfortable tailoring. Some modern historians say yes, pointing to regional cloth adjustments. Measurements blur into patterns, patterns into stories, stories into sleep. The lines on the parchment fade gently, like breath on a cold window, leaving only the soft memory of cloth against skin, stitch after stitch, night after night. Others think it's just anecdotal. The debate rolls on. People think of medieval life as simple, but human bodies have always been complicated. There were no standard sizes, back then no small, medium, or large tags sewn into collars. Everything was bespoke. And sleeve measurements, they were a minefield. Tailors had to account for them, especially with young apprentices or noble heirs. You couldn't exactly let someone outgrow a gown they'd just paid for. So, tailors invented clever solutions: hidden seam allowances, extra cloth folded invisibly inside the sleeve, ready to be let out later. It was like medieval adjustable clothing. One tailor joked that he could follow a boy from cradle to knighthood without ever cutting new sleeves. Did he really manage that? Well, no one knows. Scholars still discuss whether it was marketing or reality. The tailor pulls out a length of braided measuring cord, marked in knots instead of numbers. Historians still argue whether polished tailors had formalized measurement systems or relied on personal tricks. Some surviving guild books suggest each master had his own method, like the time a merchant as apprentice flexed during a fitting to impress the tailor as daughter's dulting in sleeves so tight he couldn't bend his elbows for 2 weeks. Or the scholar who insisted his robe sleeves reach precisely to his fingertips, then complained when he couldn't turn pages in his books. Classic. Tonight, your tailor runs the cord through his fingers, reviewing tomorrow's client list. There's a nobleman visiting from Poznag who requested hunting sleeves shorter, tighter cuffs, so his bowstring won't catch. That's easy enough, but then there's the mayor's wife, who wants ceremonial sleeves with exactly 7 pleats at the shoulder. Why 7? Well, some believed odd numbers brought luck. Others just liked the aesthetic. There's also a superstition among tailors that if you miscount the pleats, you invite disaster. The tailor sighs, remembering past sleeve disasters born from bad measurements. But tailoring was more than just measurement. There was a kind of secret language to sleeves. Your tailor carefully rolls up tomorrow's client parchments, each marked with sleeve sketches. There's also the issue of seasonal measurements. In summer, clients requested roomier sleeves to allow for sweat and airflow, and then there's growth spurts. There's even a quirky story about King Władysław II Jagiello, who supposedly had his hunting sleeves resized every 6 months. Your tailor sets down his measuring cord and picks up a pattern parchment. It's covered in smudges and faint ink lines from years of use. Patterns also told quiet stories. This curve here. Before bed, the tailor whispers a quick invocation: may tomorrow's sleeves fit without complaint. Outside, Krakow remains hushed. Somewhere, a church bell chimes quietly, marking the hour. And you, half dreaming now, drift along with him. The tailor's workshop grows quieter still, the last embers in the brazier settling into a faint, warm glow. But before sleep fully claims the room, there's one final layer to the story of medieval polished tailors and their prayers before cutting sleeves: the guild itself. If you were a tailor in Krakow, you belonged to a guild, or at least, you did if you wanted to avoid trouble. And the Tailors Guild, bro, they were serious about sleeves. If you cut a sleeve wrong, you couldn't just slap on an extra piece of fabric to fix it. Cloth wasn't like modern textiles. There were no stretch materials or handy hemming tapes. Every thread was accounted for. That's why the guild taught tailors to pause, breathe, and recite a short protective blessing before the scissors met the fabric. Apprentices started young, sometimes at age 12, learning how to sew simple seams before moving on to more complicated things like pleats, linings, and yes, sleeves. Not because he plans to use it anytime soon, but because it's part of his story. Like the sleeves he cuts, it represents careful craftsmanship and respect for life's fragility. There's a fringe fact here. Some guilds required apprentices to sew their own funeral shroud as part of their training. Was it practical? Maybe. Was it a reminder of mortality? Definitely. If your workshop stitched for the wrong political faction, you could find yourself out of work or worse. Was it requested, or did he do it on his own? Well, that's one of the secrets he's taking to his grave. During the Polish-Lithuanian Union, tailors sometimes embroidered royal symbols onto sleeves, signaling alliances. Some contained hidden pockets, others carried charms sewn into the lining: a silver coin for luck, a sprig of rosemary for protection. Did every tailor offer these secret services? Probably not, but your tailor did, when clients asked discreetly. The candle has burned low, the tailor's scissors are set aside, and the hum of the workshop has faded into the soft background of night. You've traveled through the folds and pleats of medieval sleeves, wandered the quiet streets of Krakow, and listened in on the whispered prayers of people long gone but still strangely familiar. Did they do it willingly? Historians debate that, but either way, it was risky business. There's no need to hold on to the details anymore. And so are you, floating quietly toward sleep, wrapped in the simplest, oldest fabric there is: rest. But here, in this shared space between story and sleep, everything can pause for a moment. No sleeves to cut, no patterns to trace, just the soft weight of rest settling over you. Let the measurements blur, let the patterns fade like chalk on an old wooden table. That's perfectly fine. For now, all you need to do is drift, gently and slowly, deeper into the calm. All that's left is a feeling, a calm, steady warmth, like wool against skin on a cool night. If you accidentally cut a nobleman's sleeve too short, you might face a guild penalty, a literal coin placed in the mistake chest, which funded the guild's charity work. Tomorrow will bring new cloth, new clients, and new prayers whispered over scissors. But for tonight, the shop is still. Some scholars think this practice started as a way to keep tailors honest. Others believe it was a clever way to build a community safety net. It's a carved piece of wood, shaped like a sleeve, polished smooth by years of touch. Every tailor in the guild receives one upon becoming a master. His has a small crack near the hem, a reminder of the night he stayed up too late working on festival robes and accidentally cut a left sleeve for the right arm. He fixed it before anyone noticed, but the token stays cracked, a silent badge of humility. Either way, the mistake chest was real, and tailors approached it with both dread and respect. Tailoring wasn't just a solo craft, it was part of an entire social machine, and that machine had rules. The story of medieval sleeves, of guilds, of whispered blessings, has wrapped around you like soft wool. You're folded into the quiet rhythm of history now, where fabric meets thread, and patience meets sleep. They controlled when, where, and how you worked. There were feasts, too. Imagine a long wooden table covered in roasted meats, loaves of rye bread, and mugs of mead. Tailors toasted each other after big jobs, especially when they'd finished difficult garments without a single mis-cut sleeve. Did some tailors brag about their perfect stitches? Absolutely. Tailoring has always involved a bit of humble bragging. Want to cut a new sleeve pattern? Better check the guild statutes first. Some guilds had specific ceremonies for beginning a big project, especially for noble clients or ceremonial garments. Tailors added new notes in the margins, sometimes in Polish, sometimes in Latin. One surviving Krakow pattern has a scribbled warning near the sleeve line. Measure twice, cut once, or face the bishop's wrath. Was that a joke or a real experience? Historians aren't sure, but it feels familiar, doesn't it? In Krakow, it was common to light a candle and say a short prayer before making the first cut, yes, even for something as simple as a sleeve. Guilds weren't just about regulating prices or training apprentices. Why the formality? Well, mistakes were expensive. Cloth was precious, and sleeves were tricky. Others suggest they were simpler Polish phrases, whispered privately, like "Lord, guide my hand as I cut." No one really knows, because guild secrets were just that, secret. Historians still argue about the exact wording of these prayers. Some claim they were Latin invocations to Saint Homobonus, the patron saint of cloth merchants and tailors. Standing in the chilly guild hall, hands trembling slightly as the master tailor handed him the pair of shears. The iron blades gleamed, heavy in his palm. He wasn't allowed to cut until he whispered the guild prayer. And yes, he stumbled over the words the first time. Everyone does. That's part of the tradition. Your tailor remembers his own apprentice initiation vividly. Guilds also controlled how tailors trained new members. Your tailor still keeps his first trout in a chest under his workbench. Guild meetings weren't all prayers and solemn ceremonies, though, but there were also fines for mistakes. Another guild tradition involved passing down master patterns, often traced onto vellum or stiff parchment. Some patterns were centuries old, with lines faded from use. Tailors also had to navigate politics and patronage. A noble family might favor one workshop over another. Your tailor remembers once stitching a tiny Jaguar eagle into the lining of a nobleman's sleeve, not visible to the outside world, but a quiet symbol of loyalty. Sleeves weren't just cloth, they were communication devices. Before finally climbing into bed, the tailor glances at the small guild token hanging by his workbench. Now, the room softens, the brazier's glow fades to coals. The tailor's breath evens out, and you, listening quietly, are part of this hush. Your breath slows, your thoughts drift, so here we are, at the gentle end of tonight's journey. Maybe you're noticing your own breath slowing now, just a little, like the soft rustle of cloth being folded for the morning. Outside your window, wherever you are in the world right now, the world continues its quiet spinning. Maybe you'll dream of candlelit workshops or distant medieval streets, or maybe you won't remember any of this at all when you wake up. The tailor has closed his eyes, the scissors are silent.